Hi, I am the Yeti, and I'm going to read to you something I wrote entitled, Taking a Step Backwards in Order to Move Forwards. So to begin, Section 1. The tool is not evil. First, I would like to say, if you are unaware that our culture is heading down a rocky path, and that there are many problems in our world, then you are starting in the wrong place. I am not sure where I heard it first, but the net says the quote is attributed to a Donnie Miller, and no statement rings as true as when it was said, "In the age of information, ignorance is a choice." There are more than enough doom and gloom videos and depressing documentaries citing numerous studies and reports that will describe in great detail the problems that plague humanity. Very few of these sources of information present any form of solution. That is what I would like to talk about here. Solutions average people can apply to alleviate many of the problems we face. Now, I can already hear you asking, but how are you going to talk about solutions to problems without telling me what the problems are? That will actually be easier than you would think. Starting with the fact that the videos that do offer solutions all present the same general concepts, despite them all being on completely different topics. Suggesting, as I will discuss in a moment, that most, if not all, of the problems we face stem from a common root. So, for the sake of context, I will briefly discuss one problem that we face in our world. A problem that, if it is not the cause of, then it at least exasperates every problem we face in our modern world. As I am sure you may have guessed, the problem I speak of is money. Or, more specifically, the inevitable collapse of our global monetary system. Again, I can hear you screaming, "Oh no, another doomsdayer trying to convince me the economic system is going to suddenly fall apart without warning." That is not what I am saying. When I say the inevitable collapse of our global monetary system, I am talking about the fact that by its very nature, we will either eventually abandon the monetary system, recognizing it as obsolete, or we will continue attempting to prop up the antiquated system, all the while costing resources, our environment, and eventually our very lives to try to continue the way things have always been. This collapse can come tomorrow or in 100 years, but make no mistake in its inevitability. Now, what do I mean by the system has become obsolete? To understand that, first you must understand what at its root money is meant to do. Though nearly every culture in our world has its own version of money, and some have their own source to justify its value, at their root all forms of money are the same thing: a token to help facilitate trade. Now, before money, we had the barter system, and though very effective in small communities, money was conceived at some point by almost every culture to facilitate the problems with the barter system when dealing with an ever-increasing population. The two main problems that money solves in a barter system is the smoothness of trade and the depletion of resources in times of scarcity. For the first problem, we need to think about a pie maker in ancient times. As they needed firewood, but the woodcutter does not like pies, the pie maker needs to find someone who has something the woodcutter does like, and trade the pie for the item. Then he can trade the item to the woodcutter for the wood he needs for the winter. For the second problem, you need to understand that in the barter system, the pie maker would have to have traded pies all summer for the goods he believed he would need to survive the winter. However, if the winter turns out to be harsher than expected and he runs out of firewood early, he is unable to get berries in the winter to make more pies. Not to mention, the woodcutter hates pie, so he can't even promise him one in the summertime to get the wood he needs in the winter. However, with money serving as a token, the pie maker can spend all summer trading pies for tokens. Then, as the tokens do not spoil like the berries would, he is able to trade the tokens at any time for the wood he needs. In this fashion, money has been a very useful tool, and that is all it is, a tool for us to use. Unfortunately, just like most tools, it does not matter how well it serves its intended use. All tools can be used for multiple purposes. Given enough time, the creativity of the human imagination can turn any tool into a weapon. In the generations it has been used, money has been twisted to serve as a tool of manipulation, enslavement, and even destruction. Yet, these are just underlying issues and do not address the inevitable end inherent in the concept of currency. This inevitability comes from a third effect of money, primarily the limiting of consumption of resources through increasing and decreasing of value. An example of this would be the woodcutter noticing the winter starting extra harsh and has anticipated an extra demand for wood, so in response he raises his price. At first, this may seem greedy and may indeed result in the poorest of people being unable to afford the wood they need to survive the winter. However, it prevents or at least discourages any one person from buying more than they need, helping to limit distribution in order to provide enough to go around. Then, come the spring, people would need wood less and be more inclined to go without, or cut their own wood than pay the inflated price. Or even another woodcutter could come along and undersell the first, all of which will force the first woodcutter to reduce his price once again. That is the theory anyways. Supply and demand determine the value of goods and services organically within the system, preventing the overconsumption of resources by limiting consumption during times of increased demand. Unfortunately, it does not seem to work that way in our present world. Far less consideration is given to supply when determining value, even to the point of limiting supply, reducing quality, and any other means they can think of to increase demand, allowing them to increase the perceived value. One need only pay attention to notice that in our modern world, companies work to improve their efficiency, increase production, and decrease costs, yet the price of new products do not reflect this. Rather than basing value on supply, it's now a matter of what they are capable of convincing the consumer to spend, allowing them to gain more than the cost of the goods or services, thus creating monetary profit. Not only is this concept of profit theft from the consumer, it is also the worst manipulation of the monetary system that has perverted its purpose, and instead of limiting consumption and conserving our resources, we are now wasting resources at an unbelievable rate in an attempt to increase profits. Essentially, throwing away the things that really matter in order to collect more useless tokens that are meant to be used to acquire the things that really matter. Equipment is allowed to sit and rust unused while people are forced to perform the tasks manually. Homes sit vacant, wasting energy, space, and resources while people freeze to death in the streets. And our food is allowed to rot while people starve to death. There is plenty of supply of just about everything we produce these days, especially the necessities for life, and yet demand is not being met. Obviously, something is getting in the way. If you are like me, I spent the first 20 some odd years of my life floating complacently in the system, believing despite all the problems in the world, humanity was doing the best it could. However, in the early 2000s, I was introduced to some material that forced me to reevaluate my views of the world, and without getting into all the doom and gloom documentaries I've been through, I will say I was drastically wrong. In my research, the most jarring information to me I came across was some figures from the early 2000s records. In the year 2010, we as a planet produced enough grain to feed more than 9 to 11 billion people a 2,000 calorie diet all year long. At that time, we had just broken the 7 billion population mark, meaning we had almost twice the grain necessary to feed everybody on the planet, and yet people still starved to death. Now, some people will claim that the food was used for other things, not just human consumption. To them, I point out that it was just grain, not other vegetables or meat produced in that figure. On top of that, there's the figures in 2010 that in America alone, 34 million tons of food waste was generated. An estimated 60% of the food we produced went to landfills. Less than 20% was consumed by humans, less than 10% consumed by animals or composted. Also, in 2009, it was estimated to have over 13 million vacant homes in the continental United States, and the census data at that time estimates around 4 million homeless on the streets. Yet people were still allowed to freeze to death while homes sat empty. I wish I could say this is a new phenomenon, but just a cursory glance in history is going to show you it has been happening for a long time. A noteworthy report would be the articles from the Great Depression talking about the warehouses full of food allowed to rot while people stood in bread lines or starved to death because they could not find work and could not afford the food that was readily available. Now, before you get too depressed, I did find a ray of hope in my research in the form of the late visionary named Jacques Fresco. He developed the concept called a resource-based economy as a potential alternative to the present monetary system. However, I will get more into that later. Right now, I would like to explain that those who invented profit, and even those who seek it today, are not necessarily evil, just opportunists, taking advantage of the system they were given. In fact, the original inventors may simply have been reacting to a survival instinct, seeing the death of their system in the future. For what do you think would happen to money in a world of abundance where we could produce more than we can consume, supply more than we could demand? In any case, hating those who seek profit will do very little good. Instead, we need to focus our energy in fixing the system that they are taking advantage of. Side note, those seeking profit and a billionaire, I think, are two different animals. Now, as this is a little more complex of an issue, and my example will have to be a little more extreme, so you will have to bear with me. There will be some holes in this analogy. For this, we will go back to our pie maker, and it is now spring. With an early spring and very favorable weather, the bushes have produced a mass abundance of berries. So many He is able to make and sell enough pies to afford a magical device that will make the pies for him, freeing him to spend more time picking berries. This allows him to make so much more pie, he is able to buy a device that will pick the berries for him. Now he is able to lower the price of his pies because he no longer has to charge for the time he is making or the time for picking the berries. He has made so much money, he is able to improve his shop to the point he can make everybody in town a whole pie every day. Unfortunately, not everybody would want a whole pie to themselves every single day, and quickly people begin to get burnt out. This would force the pie maker to lower the price in response to the drop in demand. With the magical devices picking his berries and making his pies, his chickens laying his eggs, all he can charge for is the price of the flour and what little time he spends selling pies in his shop. This does encourage some people to buy more pie even when they don't want a whole one, but still, he is not able to make enough money to buy the meat and veggies from the farmer or the wood he needs to stock up for the winter. This leaves him little choice but to limit the number of pies he makes each day, limiting production and allowing the excess berries to rot needlessly on the vine, wasting resources. This will allow him to justify selling pies at the price he did when he was still able to survive. Now, I know the example leaves a lot open, and I can hear a lot of you saying, well, why didn't he just sell the excess berries? First, I never said he wasn't selling some of the berries, and second, it was meant as an example to help understand how our pursuit for profit can be wasteful, even if it seems necessary. Finally, the example was to help understand that unless we can provide the necessities of life in abundance to everybody, then the desire to sell a product for more than it is worth in order to survive is not an evil act. It is humanity's ability to adapt and exploit unique opportunities that makes us as successful in surviving as we are. Yet, let's not forget, as suggested by the figures I presented earlier, we today can indeed provide an abundance of everything needed to survive to every human on the planet. Also, we have the means to transport anything from one point on this planet to the farthest possible point on the planet in less time than it takes for a human to die from dehydration. So as I can see it, we no longer can justify allowing such preventable waste and suffering. Also, I hope that it was understood that the magical devices represented automation. Though through improved efficiency and the application of automation, we can never reach zero value in a product, we can in fact reduce its cost to the point where a single person need only work one 40-hour work week max once in their life to earn enough to retire on. This is because even though we can reduce the cost of a product through efficiency and automation, this does not reduce the value of a person's time. In fact, upon freeing the public from such drudgery, we allow the opportunity for further education and thus the increase in the value of each individual's time. We will eventually reach a point where the truth is obvious to everyone, that each individual's value to the community is greater than the cost to support them. However, in our modern age, the greatest tool for freeing humanity is feared because the more automation we apply, the less jobs are available for everyone. Nobody is willing to lose their job because the price of the things needed to survive are not equal to their cost to produce. The companies that provide us our food and shelter and energy are seeing record profits each year, while the individual has to spend more of their paycheck on these necessities than ever before. Now, I hear you asking, what does this all mean? What can I as an individual do? I am not some huge corporation and they are too big for me to do anything about, right? Well, that is what I'm hoping to explain here today. Since that will lead us into our next section, I will leave you with a quote from the dialogue of the grasshopper from the movie Ants. Quote, "These ants outnumber us 100 to 1. If they ever realize this and rise up, there goes our way of life." Something to think about. Section. So to begin, Section 1. The tool is not evil.